Elderly alien appears at struggling human single dad's door. He lets her stay the night, then David Beck ran his calloused fingers through his blonde hair, exhaustion weighing on his broad shoulders as he stared at the pile of bills scattered across the kitchen table. The harsh reality of single parenthood had hit him like a freight train after Sarah's passing 6 months ago. Their modest home on the outskirts of New Haven Colony, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt hollow despite his best efforts. "Daddy?" A small voice pulled him from his thoughts. David turned to see his 3-year-old daughter, Emma, standing in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Her golden curls and bright blue eyes were carbon copies of her mother's, a bittersweet reminder of what he'd lost. "Hey, princess." He forced a smile, quickly sweeping the bills into a drawer. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" "Monster under bed," she declared with the absolute certainty only a toddler could muster. David sighed, rising from his chair. "Well, we can't have that, can we? Let's go check it out." After the standard monster checking ritual and tucking Emma back in with promises of protection, David made his way back downstairs. The colony's artificial weather system had kicked into winter mode, and synthetic snow fell gently outside the windows, creating an almost Earth-like scene. The terraforming company where he worked as a security officer had recreated the seasons perfectly, even if the gravity was slightly off. He poured himself a finger of whiskey, real Earth whiskey, not the synthetic stuff, and settled onto the couch. The silence of the house pressed in around him. Sarah should be here, curled up beside him, planning their future. Instead, he was alone, trying to figure out how to raise their daughter without her. A hesitant knock at the door startled him from his melancholy. David glanced at the wall chronometer, 22:47. No one should be out in the colony's synthetic snowfall this late, especially not on his remote street. The knock came again, barely audible above the hum of the heating system. David set his glass down and moved cautiously to the door. Since the Proxima incident, colonists had become wary of unexpected visitors. He checked the security feed and frowned. Standing on his doorstep was what appeared to be an elderly Fexilian woman. The humanoid alien's silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her deeply lined face bearing the characteristic purple-tinged skin of her species. She wore what looked like a traditional Fexilian sweater. Its intricate patterns faded with age. She huddled against the cold, her four-fingered hands trembling. David hesitated. Fexilians were peaceful traders, one of humanity's first allies after first contact. But what was one doing here, alone at this hour? His security training told him to be cautious. His humanity, the part Sarah had always loved most about him, told him to open the damn door. He disengaged the lock. "Can I help you?" he asked, keeping his body positioned to block entry if necessary. The elderly Fexilian looked up, relief washing over her weathered features. Her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and a startling amber, blinked rapidly. "Forgiveness, human friend," she said in heavily accented English. "I am Marine. My transport, malfunction. Cold is not good for old bones." She gestured to the synthetic snow. "Shelter, please. Until morning only." David studied her. Despite his training, he couldn't see any threat in this frail alien woman. And leaving her outside in the cold seemed cruel, regardless of species. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Central District. My granddaughter." She trailed off, a flash of something fear crossing her features. "I visit only." David made his decision. "Come in, but quietly. My daughter's sleeping." Relief flooded the alien's face. "Many thanks, kind human." As Irene stepped inside, David noticed she walked with a slight limp. He helped her to the couch, where she sank down gratefully. "Tea," he offered, remembering that Fexilians could consume most human beverages. "Please, warmth good." While the water boiled, David kept one eye on his unexpected guest. She seemed harmless enough, examining the family photos on the wall with curious interest. "Your mate?" she asked, pointing to a picture of Sarah. David's throat tightened. "My wife. She died 6 months ago. Terraforming accident." Irene's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "Great sorrow. I too know loss." She placed a four-fingered hand over her heart. Here, pain never leaves, only changes. Something in her words struck David. It was exactly how he felt. The pain hadn't diminished. It just transformed into something he could almost carry. He handed her the tea, which she accepted with both hands, a traditional gesture of Fexilian gratitude. "Your small one?" she asked, nodding toward a photo of Emma. "My daughter, Emma. She's 3. Beautiful child. A strong spirit, yes? Like father." Despite himself, David smiled. "Stubborn as hell, just like her mom." They fell into surprisingly comfortable conversation. Irene spoke of her homeworld, of her own family, carefully avoiding any mention of why she was traveling alone. David found himself talking about Sarah more than he had in months, the words flowing easier to this stranger than they had to friends. As the night grew later, David prepared the guest room. "It's not much, but you'll be warm." "More than enough, kind human." "David." She pronounced his name carefully, as if it were precious. "Tomorrow I continue journey." "I can help you get transport to the Central District in the morning," he offered. Something flickered in her amber eyes. "You have done much already." As David lay in bed later, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Irene's story than a simple transport malfunction. But exhaustion soon claimed him, and he fell into the first peaceful sleep he'd had in months. He didn't hear the soft footsteps as Irene moved through the house, pausing at Emma's room to whisper something in her native tongue over the sleeping child. Nor did he notice when she removed a small device from beneath her sweater and sent a brief, encrypted message into the night. David woke to the sound of Emma's delighted giggles, an unusual occurrence since Sarah's death. Blinking away sleep, he checked the chronometer. 6:17. Too early for his daughter to be up, and certainly too early for her to sound so happy. He pulled on a shirt and moved quietly down the hallway. The sound was coming from the kitchen, where he found Emma perched on a chair, watching in fascination as Irene prepared something that smelled surprisingly appetizing. "The small one woke," Irene explained, her amber eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hungry, yes? I make traditional morning meal." Emma looked up at her father. "Irene makes purple pancakes, Daddy." David smiled despite his surprise. "I see that. Good morning to you both." "Apologies if overstepped," Irene said, her four-fingered hands deftly flipping what indeed looked like violet-hued pancakes. "Child has spirit of curiosity. Reminds of my granddaughter." "No, it's fine. It's nice to see her smiling." David poured himself coffee. "You mentioned your granddaughter last night. She lives in the Central District?" A shadow passed over Irene's features. "Yes, Lanaya studies at Human University. Brilliant mind. The conversation halted abruptly as a heavy pounding rattled the front door. David's security instincts flared instantly. No one knocked like that unless there was trouble. "Stay here," he told Emma firmly, then glanced at Irene. The elderly alien had gone rigid, her purple-tinged skin paling to a sickly lavender. "They found me," she whispered, confirming David's sudden suspicion that his house guest was more than she appeared. The pounding came again, followed by a harsh voice amplified by what sounded like a translator. "Colonial security! Open immediately!" David moved to the window and carefully peered out. His heart sank. 3 Draconid enforcers stood on his porch, reptilian humanoids known for their ruthless efficiency as bounty hunters. Behind them waited 2 more aliens he didn't recognize, all heavily armed. "David Beck," the lead Dracon called, "we know you harbor the fugitive Irene Fex. Surrender her immediately or face prosecution under Galactic Compact law." David turned to Irene, who had moved to stand protectively near Emma. "What the hell is going on?" "No time to explain fully," she said, her voice suddenly stronger, more authoritative. "They are not official security. They are hegemony agents. If they take me, millions die." "That's a hell of a thing to drop on someone over breakfast," David muttered, mind racing. "Why should I believe you?" Irene reached into her sweater and pulled out a small medallion bearing the insignia of the Galactic Science Council. Impossible to counterfeit. "I was lead researcher. Found something dangerous. Something they want." Her eyes met his, fierce despite her frail appearance. "I trust you with truth because you showed kindness when no one would. Now I ask greater kindness. Help us escape." Us? David questioned. Your child, myself, my granddaughter who waits. Her four-fingered hand trembled slightly. Please. The pounding intensified. Final warning, Beck! We're authorized to use force. David made his decision in an instant. Emma, remember our special hide-and-seek game? The one for emergencies? The little girl nodded solemnly. Go get your backpack, the one with the rabbit on it, and meet me in the basement, quick as a bunny. As Emma scampered off, David turned to Irene. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the colony's subsystems. We can use it to reach the central district, but we need to move now. Erin's relief was palpable. Thank you. David grabbed his go bag, always prepared since the Proxima incident, and his service pistol from the locked cabinet. As a colony security officer, he was authorized to carry it, though he'd hoped never to need it. A crash from the front of the house told him the Draconids had lost patience. They were breaking in. David scooped up Emma as she returned with her backpack. Remember, princess, quiet like a mouse. They slipped into the basement just as heavy footsteps entered the kitchen above. David activated the hidden panel, a security measure from the early, more paranoid days of colony establishment, revealing a narrow passage. In here, he whispered, helping Irene through first, then passing Emma to her before entering himself and sealing the entrance behind them. The tunnel was dimly lit by emergency strips, casting everything in a blue glow. It smelled of damp and machinery, not pleasant, but far better than facing whatever waited above. We need to move quickly, David said, taking Emma from Irene. Can you keep up? The elderly alien straightened, seeming to shed years as she did so. I am stronger than I appear, David Beck. Age is often useful disguise. They moved through the maintenance tunnel as rapidly as possible, David leading the way with Emma in his arms, Irene following with surprising agility. Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of the search through the colony's infrastructure. Where exactly are we going? David asked as they paused at a junction. University District, Irene replied. Lanaya waits at laboratory. She has transport prepared. Your granddaughter knew you were in trouble. Smart girl. When I did not arrive as scheduled, contingency plan activated. Irene's expression softened. She is much like your Emma. Curious, brave. David adjusted his daughter in his arms. And just what is it these bounty hunters want from you? Irene's amber eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. Discovery that could change balance of galactic power. In wrong hands, weapon. In right hands, salvation. That's cryptic. Full explanation when safe, she promised. For now, know that human kindness may have saved more than one old alien's life. They continued through the tunnels, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter. Emma surprisingly remained calm, treating the whole experience as an adventure rather than a flight for their lives. As they approached the university sector, Irene touched David's arm. When you meet Lanaya, understand she is not what she seems. None of us are. That's not exactly reassuring, David replied, but found himself curious despite the danger. Trust that brought you this far, Irene said simply. Little further needed. The university district loomed ahead, its sleek architecture a stark contrast to the residential zone they'd fled. David's arms ached from carrying Emma, but adrenaline kept him moving. The maintenance tunnel widened as they approached an access point marked with the university's insignia. Here, Irene whispered, pressing her palm against a hidden scanner. The panel slid open, revealing a dimly lit laboratory storeroom. David stepped through cautiously, his security training keeping him alert despite his exhaustion. Where's your granddaughter? Main lab. Through there. Irene pointed to a door across the room. Before they could move, the distinct sound of a weapon powering up froze them in place. Identify yourselves, commanded a melodic yet firm female voice from the shadows. Irene stepped forward. Lanaya, it's me. I've brought friends. The lights brightened gradually, and David found himself staring at the most striking woman he'd ever seen. Lanaya stood tall and proud, a pulse rifle held with practiced ease in her slender four-fingered hands. Her skin held the same purple tinge as Irene's. But where the elders was weathered, Lanaya's was smooth and luminous. Her features were delicately alien yet hauntingly beautiful. High cheekbones, a graceful neck, and eyes the color of Earth's amber that seemed to glow with inner light. Her silver-white hair, unlike Irene's traditional style, was cut in a practical, shoulder-length fashion that framed her face perfectly. David became acutely aware of his disheveled appearance and the fact that he hadn't shaved that morning. "Grandmother," Linnea lowered her weapon, relief evident in her voice. "I feared the worst when—" The conversation halted as alarms blared throughout the building. Linnea rushed to a console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Perimeter breach. They've tracked us." Her eyes met David's with surprising intensity. "You're security trained?" He nodded, shifting Emma to his other arm. "Colonial security, 5 years. Good. We'll need that." She tossed him a small communicator. "Take my grandmother and your child to the emergency shelter. Third door on the left, code 7392. And leave you here alone." "Not happening." David set Emma down beside Irene. "Princess, stay with Ms. Irene. Okay? Daddy needs to help." Emma nodded solemnly, clutching her rabbit backpack. "Stubborn like all humans," Linnea remarked, but a hint of admiration colored her tone. She reached into a cabinet and tossed him a second pulse pistol. "Know how to use this?" David checked the weapon with practiced ease. "Point and shoot usually works." A smile, quick and unexpected, flashed across Linnea's face. "There's more to it, but that's the essence." The doors at the far end of the laboratory burst open. 3 Draconid hunters charged in, weapons raised. David reacted instantly, pushing Linnea behind a heavy metal table as energy bolts sizzled through the air where they'd stood. "Get down," he shouted to Irene, who was already pulling Emma behind a storage unit. David returned fire, his shots precise despite the unfamiliar weapon. 1 Draconid fell, clutching its scaled chest. Beside him, Linnea moved with astonishing grace, each shot finding its mark. "Not bad for a human," she called over the chaos. "Not bad yourself," David replied, feeling an unexpected thrill at their synchronized movements. More hunters poured in. David counted at least 5 more, including a massive Jurgen enforcer whose thick hide would resist standard pulse fire. "Ha! We're outnumbered," he warned. Linnea's eyes met his, a fierce determination in them that stirred something primal in him. Numbers aren't everything. She reached for a device on her belt and pressed a sequence. Suddenly, the laboratory's defense systems activated, energy barriers materializing between sections of the room, trapping several hunters in containment fields. The Jurgen enforcer, however, pushed through, its massive form bearing down on them. David emptied his weapon into it, slowing but not stopping the behemoth. "Cover me," Linnea called, darting toward a nearby console. David positioned himself between her and the advancing Jurgen, his empty weapon now useless except as a club. The enforcer swung a massive fist. David dodged, feeling the air displacement as it missed his head by centimeters. He countered with a strike to the creature's throat. One of the few vulnerable points on a Jurgen, but it barely flinched. A massive hand caught David's shoulder, slamming him against the wall. Pain exploded through his body. Through blurred vision, he saw the Jurgen raise its weapon for a killing blow. Then Linnea was there, moving faster than seemed possible. She pressed something against the Jurgen's hide, a small disc that pulsed with blue energy. The enforcer convulsed, then collapsed in a heap. "Neural disruptor," she explained, helping David to his feet. Her touch sent an unexpected current through him, different from the pain of his injuries. Jurgen nervous systems are particularly susceptible. Their faces were inches apart. David became acutely aware of her scent, something like cinnamon and ozone, and the warmth of her hand on his arm. For a moment, the battle around them seemed to fade. "Grandmother! The data core!" Irene's urgent call broke the moment. 2 Draconids had broken through to the main laboratory, where a glowing cylinder, presumably the data core, stood on a pedestal. Linnea cursed in her native tongue and sprinted toward the lab, David close behind. They were too far. The hunters would reach the core first. Then Emma, who had somehow slipped away from Irene, emerged from beneath a desk directly in the Draconid's path. The hunters hesitated, momentarily confused by the small human child. That split second was all David and Linnea needed. They fired simultaneously, dropping both hunters before they could recover. David scooped up Emma, heart pounding with fear and relief. "What were you thinking, princess?" "Helping," she said simply, pointing to the fallen hunters with pride. Lanaya secured the laboratory doors, her movements efficient yet graceful. "Your daughter has warrior spirit, rare in one so young." "She gets it from her mother," David said, the familiar pang of loss mingling with pride. "And her father," Lanaya added, her amber eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "Few humans would stand against a Jurgen enforcer?" "Few aliens would risk their lives for strangers," he countered. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, respect, and something more primal that neither acknowledged but both felt. Irene approached, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Transport ready?" Lanaya nodded, breaking eye contact with David. "Yes, we leave immediately for the spaceport. The hegemony will send more hunters." As they gathered the necessary equipment and the precious data core, David found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Lanaya. Each time he discovered her watching him with equal interest, a mixture of curiosity and something warmer in her expression. Whatever lay ahead, David knew his life had irrevocably changed, and not just because he was now a fugitive. The spaceport's service entrance loomed before them, a nondescript metal door that belied its importance to their escape. Lanaya led the way, her movements fluid and purposeful as she bypassed the security protocols with practiced ease. "Impressive," David murmured, adjusting Emma in his arms. The little girl had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her head resting against his shoulder. Lanaya's lips curved in a subtle smile. "One develops certain skills when conventional paths are closed." They slipped through the door into a dimly lit maintenance corridor. The sounds of the busy spaceport, announcements, the hum of engines, the bustle of travelers, filtered through the walls. "Your friend's ship?" David asked Irene, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since they'd left the university. "Docking Bay 17, she replied. "Tarn is unconventional but loyal. Known him for 60 cycles." "Unconventional how?" David's security training made him wary of surprises. Lanaya exchanged a glance with her grandmother. "Tarn is Krell. They have reputation for aggressive negotiation." "A Krell smuggler," David translated. "Great." "Well, no, not all species conform to stereotypes, human," Lanaya challenged, her amber eyes flashing. "Just as not all humans are as honorable as you've proven to be." The unexpected compliment caught David off guard. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the tension between them shifted from wariness to something more electric. Irene cleared her throat. Less talking, more moving. They navigated the service corridors, avoiding security checkpoints. David noticed Lanaya constantly checking a small device on her wrist, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Problem?" he asked quietly. "Hegemony signals," she confirmed. "They're deploying throughout the port. We must hurry." They reached a junction where the maintenance corridor opened onto the main concourse. Lanaya held up a hand, signaling them to wait as she peered around the corner. "Too many eyes," she murmured. "We need distraction." David shifted Emma to his other arm, thinking quickly. "I have colony security clearance. I could create a diversion at the checkpoint." "Too dangerous," Lanaya objected, her hand resting briefly on his forearm. The touch sent warmth spreading through him, despite the circumstances. "Actually," Irene interjected, "human suggestion has merit, but not alone." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small vial of shimmering liquid. Appearance modifier. Temporary, but effective. Lanaya's eyes widened. "Grandmother, that's your last dose." "And best use for it," Irene insisted. "I modify. Pose as human official with David. Lanaya takes child, meets Tarn. We rendezvous at ship." David hesitated, reluctant to let Emma out of his sight. Lanaya seemed to sense his concern. "I will protect her with my life," she promised, her voice soft but fierce. "On my ancestors' memory." Something in her tone, a solemn reverence, convinced him. He carefully transferred his sleeping daughter to Lanaya's arms, their bodies drawing close in the process. Her scent enveloped him, that strange, intoxicating mixture of cinnamon and ozone, and he found himself lingering longer than necessary. "She likes to hold her rabbit when she sleeps," he said, voice rougher than intended. Lanaya's expression softened as she adjusted the child in her arms. "She will not leave my sight." Irene uncorked the vial and swallowed the contents. Before David's eyes, her appearance shifted, her purple skin tone fading to human pink, her alien features subtly reshaping until she resembled a distinguished human woman in her 60s. "Impressive," David whispered. "Temporary," Irene reminded him. "Hours only. Must move quickly." They separated at the junction, Linnea carrying Emma toward the cargo bays, while David and Irene, disguised as human, headed for the main security checkpoint. "Follow my lead," David murmured as they approached the security officers. He flashed his colonial security badge. "Officer Beck, special escort detail for Ambassador Keller." The security officer, a bored-looking human, barely glanced at them. "Destination?" "Classified," David replied with practiced authority. "Diplomatic immunity protocols in effect." As they passed through the checkpoint, David spotted two Draconid hunters scanning the concourse. He casually placed himself between them and Irene, guiding her with a hand at the small of her back. "Don't look now, but we've got company," he whispered. "Detected," she confirmed. "Your diversion?" David nodded toward a bank of environmental controls. "When I give the signal, head for docking bay 17. Don't wait for me." "Humans and their heroics," Irene muttered, but there was affection in her tone. David approached the environmental panel, surreptitiously removing a small tool from his pocket. Standard issue for security officers. With practiced movements, he triggered a cascade failure in the system. Alarms blared as the atmospheric regulators went haywire. Mist poured from vents, and emergency lights began flashing. Travelers panicked, creating instant chaos. "Go!" David urged Irene, who slipped away into the confusion. He headed in the opposite direction, drawing the attention of the Draconid hunters. Leading them on a chase through the crowded spaceport, David utilized his knowledge of the layout to stay just ahead of his pursuers. Finally confident he'd bought enough time, he doubled back through a service corridor, racing toward docking bay 17. The bay door was already closing when he slid through. Inside, a battered but formidable-looking vessel hummed with pre-launch energy. The boarding ramp remained down, with Linnea standing at its base, pulse rifle ready. "Cutting it close, human," she called, relief evident in her voice. "Wanted to make an entrance," he replied, sprinting up the ramp as it began to close. Inside, the ship was surprisingly spacious. Tarn, the Krell pilot, was indeed unconventional. His scaled body adorned with colorful human tattoos and jewelry. His traditional Krell warrior crest dyed in electric blue. "This is the human," he growled, looking David up and down. "Expected bigger." "He's adequate," Linnea replied, her eyes meeting David's with a hint of mischief that made his pulse quicken. "Emma?" he asked, looking around. "Sleeping quarters. With grandmother. Safe." The ship lurched as it disengaged from the docking clamps. David followed Linnea to a small cabin where Emma slept peacefully on a bunk. Irene, now reverting to her Fexilian appearance, watching over her. "Thank you," he said simply, the words inadequate for the emotions churning within him. Once they were safely in hyperspace, Tarn set the autopilot and retreated to his quarters, leaving David and Linnea alone in the ship's common area. "Now," David said, leaning against the bulkhead, "I think it's time for some answers." Linnea's amber eyes studied him intently. "Yes," she agreed, moving closer. "It is." Linnea's amber eyes held David's gaze as she took a deep breath. The ship hummed around them, the vibrations a subtle reminder of their escape. "My people, the Fexilians, were once numerous," she began, her melodic voice low. "We inhabited a system near what you call the Cygnus Arm. For millennia, we developed in isolation, evolving certain abilities." "What kind of abilities?" David asked, leaning forward. Linnea extended her hand, palm up. Before David's eyes, a small sphere of light materialized above her skin, pulsing with energy that cast dancing shadows across her features. "Energy manipulation," she explained, "at a molecular level. It's part of our genetic makeup." David watched mesmerized as the light changed colors, from amber to violet to a deep, resonant blue. "That's incredible," he murmured. "It was once commonplace among my people," Linnea said, closing her hand and extinguishing the light. "But 2 centuries ago, the hegemony discovered us. They saw weapons where we saw life, They attacked without warning. Her voice remained steady, but David noticed her four-fingered hands trembling slightly. Without thinking, he reached out, covering her hand with his. Her skin was warmer than a human's, almost feverish, but the contact felt right somehow. They nearly succeeded in wiping us out, she continued, her fingers tentatively intertwining with his. A few hundred escaped. We scattered across the galaxy, hiding our abilities, blending with other species. And the data core? David prompted gently. The key to our survival. It contains the complete genetic sequence of our people. The pure code, uncorrupted by generations of hiding and interbreeding. With it, we could restore our species. David processed this information, his thumb unconsciously tracing circles on the back of Lanaya's hand. So the hegemony wants to prevent that? Why? After all this time? Not prevent, Irene's voice came from the doorway. She stood there, looking weary but resolute. Control, weaponize. Our abilities in their hands would shift balance of galactic power. A sudden violent lurch threw them all off balance. David caught Lanaya as she stumbled against him, their bodies pressing together momentarily. Even in crisis, he couldn't ignore the electric sensation where they touched. "What the hell was that?" he called out as the ship's alarms began blaring. Tarn's gruff voice came over the intercom. "Power surge! Main drive compromised. They're dropping out of hyperspace." David steadied Lanaya, reluctantly letting her go as they rushed to the bridge. The view screen showed them tumbling back into normal space, a blue-green planet looming large before them. "Can you stabilize?" Lanaya demanded, bracing herself against the navigation console. Tarn's scaled hands flew over the controls. "Negative. Main power failing. Auxiliary systems only. Must land." "Where are we?" David asked, scanning the readouts. "Terran colony world," Tarn growled. "Proxima outpost." David's heart sank. "That's a mining colony. Minimal security. Remote location." "Perfect place for ambush," Irene observed grimly. The ship shuddered as they entered the atmosphere, systems flickering ominously. David rushed back to check on Emma, finding her awake and frightened. "It's okay, princess," he soothed, gathering her into his arms. "Just a bumpy ride." "Like the roller coaster?" she asked, her small voice trembling. David smiled despite everything. "Just like that. And what do we say about roller coasters?" "We're brave," she declared, her tiny fist raised in their private ritual. "That's right. We're brave." When he returned to the bridge with Emma, Lanaya was coordinating emergency landing procedures with Tarn. Her efficiency and calm under pressure impressed him. Another facet of this increasingly fascinating woman. "Proximity alert!" Tarn barked. "Hegemony cruiser detected in orbit." "How did they find us so quickly?" David demanded. Lanaya's expression darkened. "The power surge. It wasn't random. We've been tracked." The ship broke through cloud cover, revealing a rugged landscape of forests and mountains. Tarn aimed for a clearing near a lake, the vessel groaning in protest as they descended. "Impact in 30 seconds, the Krell warned. "Brace!" David secured Emma in a crash harness, then positioned himself protectively around her. Across the cabin, his eyes met Lanaya's. In that moment of potential disaster, something unspoken passed between them, a connection deeper than their brief acquaintance should allow. The landing was rough but controlled. The ship skidded across the clearing, tearing up earth and vegetation before coming to rest at the forest's edge. Remarkably, the main cabin remained intact. "Status report," Lanaya demanded once the dust settled. "Drive core critically damaged," Tarn reported. "Repairs possible but require parts. Communications offline." "And the hegemony ship?" David asked, checking Emma for injuries. She seemed shaken but unharmed. "We'll have tracked our descent," Irene said. "They come soon." David helped Lanaya gather emergency supplies. As they worked side by side, the back of his hand brushed against hers, sending that now familiar warmth through him. She paused, her amber eyes meeting his. "I've brought danger to you and your child," she said softly. "I am sorry." "I made my choice," he replied, his voice equally low. "And I'd make it again." Something shifted in her expression, a vulnerability beneath the warrior's facade. "Why?" David considered the question. "Maybe I was tired of just surviving since Sarah died. Maybe I needed something to fight for. And now, knowing what we face? He reached out, brushing a strand of silver-white hair from her face. Now I'm certain. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Lanaya leaned slightly toward him, her lips parting. Dropships detected. Tarn's voice shattered the moment. Multiple signatures descending. Reality crashed back. They had minutes, perhaps, before the hegemony forces arrived. There's a mining outpost 10 kilometers north, David said, military training taking over. If we can reach it, we might find help, or at least communications. Then we move now, Lanaya decided. Grandmother, can you travel? Erin nodded grimly. These old bones still work when needed. As they prepared to abandon the ship, David caught Lanaya's arm. Whatever happens out there, we face it together. Her hand covered his, her touch lingering. Together, she agreed, the word carrying weight beyond their immediate danger. The abandoned mining facility loomed before them, a hulking silhouette against the darkening sky of Proxima Outpost. Years of disuse had left the prefabricated structures weathered but intact, a perfect temporary sanctuary from both the elements and their pursuers. Security looks minimal, David observed as they approached the main entrance. Probably automated when they shut down operations. Tarn grunted, adjusting his grip on the supply pack. Good. Less to bypass. David carried Emma, who had remained remarkably resilient throughout their trek through the forest. Lanaya supported Irene, whose strength had begun to falter during the journey, her breathing becoming labored and her steps unsteady. Grandmother needs rest, Lanaya said, concern evident in her voice. The strain of recent days. David nodded. Let's get inside. The security panel beside the entrance was outdated but functional. David handed Emma to Lanaya and set to work, his security training proving invaluable as he bypassed the system. The doors slid open with a protesting groan, revealing a dusty but serviceable operations center. Tarn, secure the perimeter, David instructed. I'll check the power systems. The Krell nodded, surprisingly respectful of David's authority despite his usual gruffness. Human knows his business, he muttered almost approvingly. While David worked to restore essential systems, Lanaya settled Irene on a makeshift bed in what had once been the facility manager's office. Emma, curious as always, stayed close to Lanaya, watching with wide eyes as the Fexilian woman tended to her grandmother. Is she going to be okay? Emma asked, her small voice filled with concern. Lanaya smiled gently at the child. She is very strong, little one. She just needs rest. But as night fell and the facility hummed with restored minimal power, Irene's condition worsened. Her purple-tinged skin had paled to an alarming lavender, and her breathing became shallow. What's happening to her? David asked as he entered the office, finding Lanaya kneeling beside her grandmother, hands hovering over the elder's chest. Energy depletion, Lanaya explained, her voice tight with worry. The appearance modifier she used at the spaceport, it draws from our life force. At her age, the toll is severe. Can you help her? Lanaya hesitated, then met his gaze. Yes, but you should take Emma elsewhere. What I must do, it is intimate by your standards. David understood her meaning. Tarn can watch her. He's setting up the communications array in the control room. Once Emma was safely occupied with Tarn, the gruff Krell surprisingly gentle with the child, David returned to find Lanaya preparing for whatever ritual would help Irene. You don't have to stay, she said, not looking up. I want to, he replied simply, if you'll let me. Lanaya's amber eyes met his, vulnerability and strength mingling in her gaze. It is not something outsiders usually witness. I'm not just an outsider anymore, am I? A small smile touched her lips. No, you are not. She positioned herself beside Irene, then slowly removed the outer layer of her clothing, revealing a simple undergarment that glowed faintly with embedded energy patterns. David watched, transfixed, as she placed her hands directly on her grandmother's chest and forehead. Our life force is energy, she explained softly. I can share mine with her, but the process is exposing. As she spoke, her body began to emit a soft, pulsing light. It started at her core and spread outward through her limbs, illuminating her from within. David had never seen anything so beautiful or so alien. The light flowed from Lanaya into Irene, creating a circuit of energy between them. Lanaya's face reflected both concentration and pain as she channeled her strength into her grandmother. Minutes passed, the glow intensifying until David had to shield his eyes. When it finally subsided, Irene's breathing had steadied, color returning to her features. Lanaya, however, slumped forward in exhaustion. David moved quickly to catch her before she fell. Her body was hot to the touch, almost feverish and trembling with exertion. "Hey, I've got you," he murmured, supporting her weight against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak. "She will recover now. And you need time." He helped her to a nearby couch, concern evident in his gentle handling. As he settled her, their faces came close, breaths mingling in the small space between them. "That was incredible," he said softly. "What you did." "It is our way," she replied. "Life shared strengthens both giver and receiver, though the initial transfer is taxing." David brushed a strand of silver-white hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Rest now." But she caught his hand, holding it against her skin. "Stay," she requested, her amber eyes holding his. "Please." He settled beside her and she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. The simple contact felt right, necessary somehow. "In my culture," she said after a moment, "sharing energy is sacred, intimate. With family, it is duty. With others, it is the deepest expression of connection." David understood what she wasn't saying. "Like human intimacy." "Similar, yes. Different methods, same essence." Her fingers intertwined with his. "Your species fascinates me. So physically limited compared to mine, yet your capacity for connection, for emotion, it's extraordinary." "Is that a compliment?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "Observation," she corrected, then added softly, "But yes." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. David found himself drawn to her in ways that transcended physical attraction, though that was undeniably present too. "When I first saw you in the laboratory," he admitted, "I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Alien or human." Her lips curved in a smile. "And now? Now I know you're the most extraordinary person I've ever met." She shifted to face him, her expression serious. "David, what I feel for you, it is unexpected, unprecedented. My people rarely form connections outside our kind. And yet here we are." Her hand rose to touch his face, tracing the contours with gentle curiosity. "If we survive what's coming..." The facility's alarm system suddenly blared to life, shattering the moment. David was on his feet instantly, security training taking over. Tarn burst into the room, Emma in his arms. "Hegemony dropships! 3 kilometers and closing." David's mind raced. "How long?" "Minutes only," the Krell replied grimly. Lanaya stood, swaying slightly but determined. "The data core?" "Secure," Tarn confirmed. "Communications?" "Partial success," the Krell reported. "Sent distress signal on colonial emergency frequency. No confirmation of receipt." David made a quick decision. "We need defensible position. The processing chamber, 1 entrance, thick walls, emergency protocols." As they hurried to prepare, David pulled Lanaya aside. "Whatever happens, I need you to know." She pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping his words. "Tell me after," she said, her eyes fierce with determination. "When this is over." He nodded, understanding. Some things were worth waiting to say properly. They reached the processing chamber just as the facility's external sensors detected the first hegemony forces landing. David sealed the heavy doors, activating the chamber's independent security systems. "Now we make our stand," he said, checking his weapon. Lanaya stood beside him, her strength returning. Their hands found each other in the moment before battle, a silent promise passing between them. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he affirmed. The first explosion rocked the processing chamber, dust raining from the ceiling as the hegemony forces began their assault. David positioned himself at the reinforced door, pulse rifle ready, while Tarn guarded the emergency ventilation shaft, the facility's only other potential entry point. "Emma, stay with Irene." David instructed his daughter, who nodded bravely from her hiding place behind processing equipment where Irene sat protectively beside her. Linnea worked frantically at the chamber's communication terminal. If I can boost the signal through the facility's main array... Another blast, closer this time. The door's integrity monitor flashed amber, weakening but holding. How much longer? David called, not taking his eyes off the entrance. Minutes, Linnea replied, her fingers dancing across the controls. If the Colonial Defense Fleet received our distress signal, they should be... The door buckled inward with a screech of protesting metal as cutting tools began slicing through from the outside. Out of time, Tarn growled, taking position beside David. David glanced back at Emma, his heart clenching at the sight of his daughter's frightened face. Whatever happened, he had to ensure her safety. Linnea, if they breach... They won't take us, she assured him, abandoning the terminal to join them at the door, energy already beginning to pulse beneath her skin. The cutting tools broke through, creating a gap large enough for a weapon. David fired preemptively, forcing their attackers to momentarily retreat. David, Linnea said urgently, if this goes badly, you should know. A brilliant flash of light from Emma's direction interrupted her words. They turned to see the child surrounded by a pulsing blue aura, her small hands outstretched toward the data core that Irene had placed beside her for safekeeping. Emma! David shouted, rushing toward his daughter. Linnea reached them first, her expression a mixture of shock and wonder. Impossible, she whispered. The data core had opened, its contents, a swirling mass of genetic information, flowing around Emma like luminous strands of DNA. Instead of harming her, the energy seemed to dance with her, responding to her movements. Pretty lights, Daddy, Emma said, her voice oddly calm as she moved her fingers through the glowing strands. Irene struggled to her feet, eyes wide. The child, she's channeling our energy patterns. No human should be capable unless... Linnea's gaze met David's, realization dawning. Your wife, was she studied at a research facility before Emma's birth? David's mind raced back. Yes, there were complications with the pregnancy. She underwent experimental treatments at the Cygnus Medical Institute. Fexilian genetic material, Irene breathed, must have been incorporated into treatments. The child is part Fexilian. Before David could process this revelation, the chamber door finally gave way with a thunderous crash. Hegemony troops poured in, weapons raised, only to freeze at the sight of Emma surrounded by the glowing genetic material. The Hegemony commander, a tall Draconid, stepped forward. Surrender the data core and the child, and the rest may live. David positioned himself in front of Emma. Not happening. The commander's reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile. Brave but foolish, human. You cannot. His words cut off as the facility shook with new explosions, these coming from outside. The commander's communicator crackled to life with panicked reports. Human fleet! Multiple destroyers dropping out of hyperspace. Through the chamber's small viewport, David caught glimpses of Colonial Defense Force ships engaging the Hegemony vessels in orbit. The cavalry had arrived. The commander hesitated, calculating odds that had suddenly shifted against him. In that moment of uncertainty, Linnea made her move. With a fluid gesture, she released a wave of energy that knocked the Hegemony forces back through the doorway. Tarn slammed his fist on the emergency containment button, dropping a secondary barrier that sealed the breach. That won't hold them long, David warned. It doesn't need to, Linnea replied, turning her attention back to Emma. Your daughter is the key, David. She's naturally attuned to our energy signatures. She can stabilize the genetic material in ways we never could. As if understanding, Emma giggled and clapped her hands. The glowing strands coalesced into a more coherent pattern, flowing back into the data core, but not before a small portion seemed to absorb into Emma herself, leaving her skin with the faintest lavender tinge that faded almost immediately. The facility's communication system suddenly crackled to life. Attention occupants, this is Captain Reyes of the Colonial Defense Force vessel Intrepid. We've received your distress signal and have engaged hostile forces. Identify yourselves. David grabbed the comm unit. Captain, this is Security Officer David Beck. I have civilians in need of immediate evacuation, including my 3-year-old daughter. We're being pursued by Hegemony forces for possession of Sensitive technology. A pause then. Understood, Beck. Extraction team inbound. Hold your position. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Colonial Marines secured the facility, capturing the remaining hegemony troops. Captain Reyes, a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for protecting human interests above political considerations, personally oversaw their evacuation to the Intrepid. In the ship's medical bay, Emma underwent examination while David explained their situation to Reyes. To his surprise, the captain was already familiar with the Fexilian situation. The hegemony's persecution of minority species has been on our radar for years, she explained. Earth's policy is clear. We don't interfere in alien politics unless human interests are affected. She glanced meaningfully at Emma. This definitely qualifies. Later, with Emma sleeping peacefully under observation and Irene resting in guest quarters, David found Lanaya on the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stars. Emma's going to be fine, he told her, coming to stand beside her. The doctors say the Fexilian genetic material has fully integrated. She's stable. Lanaya nodded, relief evident in her posture. And more than that, she's special, David. A bridge between our species that neither of us thought possible. Like us? He asked softly, taking her hand. She turned to face him, her amber eyes luminous in the starlight. Yes, exactly like us. The kiss that followed felt inevitable, the natural conclusion to a journey that had begun with a knock on his door during a snowy night. Her lips were warmer than a human's, sending pleasant tingles across his skin, but the emotion behind the contact was universal. Desire, affection, and something deeper taking root between them. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Lanaya rested her forehead against his. Captain Reyes has offered us sanctuary on Earth, a place where we can safely study the data core and perhaps begin restoring my people. And us? David asked. What happens to us? That depends, she replied, her fingers tracing the contours of his face. Are you prepared to help raise a half-Fexilian daughter? To partner with an alien woman who might occasionally glow in the dark? David laughed, the sound full and genuine for the first time since Sarah's death. I think I can handle that. Later that night, in the privacy of quarters assigned to them, David and Lanaya explored the physical aspects of their connection, discovering differences that intrigued rather than divided, similarities that comforted, and a shared passion that transcended species. Their joining was both alien and familiar, strange and perfect, a bridge between worlds that neither had expected to cross. 3 months later, on Earth, David stood in the doorway of their new home, watching as Lanaya taught Emma to channel her emerging abilities, small lights dancing between their fingertips as they laughed together. Irene sat nearby, her strength fully restored, offering guidance with the patience of a woman who had seen centuries pass. The data core, now secured in a human Fexilian joint research facility, had already yielded results. A small community of surviving Fexilians had gathered, hope rekindled for their species' future. David thought back to that snowy night when he'd opened his door to a stranger in need. One act of kindness had changed everything. Bringing danger, yes, but also new life, new love, and a future brighter than he could have imagined. As if sensing his thoughts, Lanaya looked up and smiled, her amber eyes finding his across the room. She extended her hand, inviting him to join their lesson. David stepped forward, embracing the family he'd never expected to find. A family that had begun with an elderly alien woman appearing at a struggling single dad's door one snowy night.